It's an area of one of the outer courtyards of the temple, and it was kind of an area where it was designated that people were going to come and debate ideas and thoughts about the Lord. Like, it was just kind of an area of the temple that was known for those conversations and those debates. So if you were in that area, there's a pretty good chance you were there for the purpose of debating ideas about God. Okay, like that was kind of the lay of the land. The spot that Jesus was in was a place where he would be actively debating things about the Lord, ideas about the Lord. Some ideas would be true, some ideas are false, but this spot, this particular location was meant for that debate. So if you were there, you weren't there because you wanted to pray. There were other parts of the temple where people prayed. This was a part where people debated. Right? Like, that's what they did there. And so it's kind of like if you find yourself in a bar at midnight, you're there for a reason. Right? Like, people know why you're there. No one's like, what are you here doing? Oh, I'm buying produce. No, you're not. You're here for a different reason, right? So if you're in this part, that's what you're there for. And Jesus is in this part, which means he is there for the purpose of speaking to the people, correcting bad ideas about God, sharing truths about himself that no one else would have ever known, opening the eyes of the people so that they would know the Father and they would know him. Like, Jesus is there to correct thinking. He's in that spot on purpose. So it says, though, that the Herodians and the Pharisees came with the purpose of trapping him. Now, the word trap isn't literally what that Greek word means. That Greek word means to hunt. Okay? Now, we think of trapping. I don't know if... Does anyone here trap? Is that kind of part of your thing? Who here has done it before? Like, you haven't done it recently, but like, you've done it before. I remember growing up as a kid, my dad was like, hey, do you want to go trapping? I was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Until I realized it's like 4:30 in the morning, he's getting me out of bed to go check trap lines. And then it was not as awesome as I had originally pictured in my 12-year-old mind. But we would go out and we'd check our trap lines. And trapping is, for those of who haven't done it, it is a very active form of hunting. It's very different than traditional hunting. You're not sitting waiting for an animal to cross, but like, you are actively seeking to find the patterns of movement that the animal is making. You're anticipating what it's going to do, and you're setting a trap so that when it comes through, it'll be caught in that trap. It does take quite a bit of work, and it is active hunting. It's not necessarily you're walking through the woods trying to find an animal, but you are lying in wait for it to come. So setting a trap is an active pursuit of the prey in which you want to capture. And so what they're doing with Jesus here is they're actively hunting Jesus. Like, we have to stop and put our mindset in the same place. Who here hunts? Like, you don't trap, but you hunt. You'll go out with a rifle or a bow or a crossbow and cheat. But like, you go out with your stuff and you go see what you can get, right? You've done that before. Put yourself in the mindset like you are actively trying to hunt this animal. This is the mindset that the Pharisees and the Herodians were in trying to get Jesus. Because for those of us that hunt, you know this. Things have to work out right for you to be successful. The animal has to make a mistake, right? Does that make sense? So one year I was sitting in a tree stand with my real bow, not a crossbow, and I was sitting there, and I had a buck come in, and he was too small for me to shoot, but he had obviously been in a couple of scraps with some other deer and had his right eye poked out. Like, his right eye was missing. And I could see it from my tree stand. He was like 20 yards away. And he walks in, and my stand's over here. So his right side is to me. That means I am invisible to him. Does that make sense? Like, he can't see me out of his right side. And so I'm sitting as still as I can. I'm hardly breathing, and I'm like not even blinking. And I watched him go and look at me in the tree stand with his left eye. Like, no clue. How does he know I'm there? The animals don't make mistakes, and they don't do it often, right? So the idea of hunting a lot of times is Because you'll see it happen where a deer will come down, it'll get almost in range, and then it'll go a different direction. And you're like, oh man, it just didn't make those extra steps to get to where I could harvest it. It didn't get out in the open. It didn't give me an opportunity. And so what the Pharisees are doing here is they're hunting Christ, but what they need him to do is make a mistake. Right? Does that make sense? Like they need him to slip up so they can get him. Otherwise, they're not going to be capable of it. And so they're actively hunting after Jesus Christ with the desire to kill him. Now, this area of the temple was home to debate, but not typically murder, right? Like that, people debated, and they probably got into hot debates, but killing a person wasn't something that was common in that spot. So these men, they come to Jesus with the intention of killing him here. And you think about the mindset of these men, that they were, put yourself in these shoes. If you're a chicken farmer, okay, can you just imagine that? No, some of you are like, no, I can't imagine that for me. If you're a chicken farmer and you have a fox that's taken a bunch of chickens from you, like every night it takes 2 or 3, how hard are you going to go after that thing? Like how hard, because it's messing with your livelihood. It is messing with like your ability to feed your family. It's doing some real damage here. I need to take this thing out. And this is how they saw Christ. They ceased to see him as a human being, and they definitely did not see him as God. He was messing with their livelihood. We need him gone. And so they were actively seeking to hunt and trap the Lord Jesus Christ. But they need a good reason, which means they need him to mess up. Because if he doesn't mess up, then we don't have an excuse. And he's really annoying to me is not a good excuse to kill somebody. So they're seeking out the charge of blasphemy. They're looking for a way to charge him with blasphemy. Because if we can do that, then we have an excuse to put him to death. And that's what the Pharisees are seeking. They want to see him put to death because of blasphemy. The Herodians are looking for him to violate the laws of Rome. And if he does that, then the Herodians have cause. See, these two parties aren't there by accident. These two parties came together because this was an enemy of my enemies, my friend situation. The Herodians were people who were Jews who were loyal to the kings put in place by Rome. The kings put in place by Rome were by the name of Herod. So there was the Herod that sought to have Jesus killed as a baby. Do you remember that? Right? And they had to flee to Egypt. And then one of his descendants, another fellow by the name of Herod, was the one who, when Jesus is put on trial, he will stand before him. We'll see that in a few weeks. So the Herodians were people loyal to Rome. And the Pharisees didn't get along necessarily with the Herodians because the Pharisees were more concerned with the law of the Lord, and they had no desire to listen to the Romans. However, since the Pharisees are concerned about God's law and making sure the law of Moses is in place, and Jesus constantly came against the Pharisees up against their traditions, not against God's law, but against their traditions, they didn't have cause to put him to death. So they brought the Herodians with them, who were leaders aligned with Roman kings, like I said, concerned with Roman law being upheld, so that if he spoke against Rome, they could put him to death for that. So, let's see what their question is. Jesus is in a part of the temple. They're debating thoughts and ideas about God, what he desires of his people, and the Pharisees and the Herodians come to him with this question. And they came to him and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are true, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not?" So here's the question. You can see how it appeals to both kind of Jewish and Roman leaders in that moment. Like there's the law and the commandments of God. Is it lawful from the Lord's standpoint that we pay these taxes that are lawful from Caesar? So there's the commands of Caesar, there's the commands of God, and these two groups are coming together asking this question. But here's where they tried to get him to mess up. They started with flattery. Did you catch that? Like, oh, there's nothing false in you, and since you only speak what's true, and since you're so perfect, and your hair sits just right, and you can just see they're trying to massage Jesus into a place where he would begin to trust them a little bit, so they could get into the inner circle and stab him in the back. This is kind of the approach that they're trying to take. They're trying to get to a place where they can question Jesus, and they're trying to get him to let his guard down. Does that make sense? Because they think we can just get him to mess up, we'll get him. So, the question is, should we pay our taxes or not? Caesar said, yes, he felt like you should probably pay your taxes. The Jews had a pretty different view of taxation. So, the assertion here, kind of the underlying assumption is that Jesus is some kind of an impartial party in this conversation. Well, what do you think, Jesus? Does God want us to pay our taxes or not? Where do you stand on this? And the truth is that Jesus actually was truly an impartial party in some ways to this question. So as a Galilean, Jesus, given the time of year, the tax that was coming up was one that only Judeans had to pay, and the Galileans did not. So as a Galilean, Jesus was not obligated to pay the tax in which they were discussing. It wasn't a part of his thing. So it was called a kenesos, or a poll tax, and it was one that Jesus he didn't legally have to pay it. So he was rather impartial. In reality, he didn't have to pay this tax. Now, that's as far as Rome was concerned. Now, kind of giving you a little bit of the cultural background, I think we miss a lot of times because we read it in our day and age, and we read if we have a chance to not pay taxes, we don't, right? Listen, did you know that if you wanted to, you could pay more taxes than you're supposed to? Did you know that? Now, why would you? I don't know. But you have the option. If you want to pay extra, you're allowed. But there was a group known as the Zealots who several years prior, maybe around 20 years prior, had caused a revolt in Israel and had actually kind of brought this about, was a big part of it. So they revolted over taxation. There were zealots in Jesus' 12. And tax collectors. Isn't that fun? The tax collector's probably sleeping with an eye open. But these men caused a result. Actually, what's interesting is that it happened about 20 years before. And if you remember what happened about 20 years before, it was that Jesus' parents lost him in the city during a time of uprising. It wasn't just that they lost him in the city and everything was peaceful. It was there was unrest and they lost the Lord. So as a mom and dad who've been loaned to Jesus, do you think maybe there was some fear there? You stop and think about that moment where they're like, oh no, we lost the Lord during a time of violence. So the Judeans were actually taxed this particular poll tax as a result of that. And so the Galileans didn't. Now, in our culture today, here in America, we understand taxes. Do you know how much, if you're kind of middle of the road, okay, your median tax bracket, do you know how much, by the time it's all said and done, sales tax, gas tax, all that stuff, you know how much of your income goes out the door in taxes? Anyone want to take a swing at it? No one? Huh? 56%. You are working into July, and all of it's going in taxes. Okay? That's also coming from a country where a 1% tax on a breakfast beverage that wasn't even coffee, it was tea. I'd understand if it was coffee, but it was tea, right? I like a cup of tea as good as the next guy, but listen, it just seems extreme that they caused a revolution over that. We're a country that understands this, so we understand what it's like when we feel overtaxed and overburdened. And so the Zealots were this group, the people that were mistaken into thinking that if we could just overthrow the oppressor, we would be blessed. They were looking at this completely wrong. They felt they needed to overthrow the foreign government, but the example that comes to mind, so I actually stopped and I'm like, okay, let me research this a little bit. When did Israel overthrow an oppressor? It didn't happen. The only examples I could get to that were close were Egypt, where God overthrew the oppressor, right? They didn't do that. And Babylon, when they were given permission to come back, and Nehemiah rebuilt the walls, and you know what I'm talking about. Those are the only times I can think of. Now there's little dust-ups with Assyria and with the Philistines and some different places where they would skirmish and they would fight, but God always won the victories for them. It was never their military might that got them where they wanted to be. It was always God doing the work. They have no history of overthrowing the oppressor. So what they were missing is that this foreign oppressor that was over them was a teacher sent by God to discipline them. That this foreign oppressor wasn't there for them to overthrow and experience the blessings of God. It was actually the discipline of the Lord and his love coming and bringing teaching and healing to their minds, where they had wandered away from the Lord and God had to bring a foreign oppressor to remind them to return to him. The reality of our day is you're always going to be under a civic authority. Always. You're never going to live like free anywhere. You're always going to live under a civic authority. Al Capone, one of the worst gangsters of all time, do you know what he went down for? He killed people. He ran money laundering. He did all kinds of stuff. Do you know what they got him on? Tax evasion, right? Listen, I don't care who you are, the IRS is going to get you. You're always going to be under a foreign authority, or you're always going to be under an authority, whether it be domestic or foreign. You're going to be under a civic authority. It means what he's trying to get us to is that we submit to Christ first, and then we submit to the authorities he's put over us. We submit to Christ first, and we submit to the authority that he has placed over us. One of the things that we have the unique advantage of doing is actually telling the civic authorities over us what we desire. And then we can also vote and get to where the places we want to be. But that wasn't the case here. They were to submit to the authorities that were placed over them, seeing Rome itself as an authority placed over them by God. But the religious leaders here and the Herodians actually aren't that concerned about what God said about taxes. They know that prosperity and peace, they know that those things come through obedience. Deuteronomy 28, they would have had this memorized. Deuteronomy 28, the whole chapter lays out the idea that obedience to God will lead to prosperity and peace. They were choosing to be disobedient and wondering why they were in such a hard place. They wanted to achieve prosperity and peace through military victory over Rome, when the real enemy wasn't Rome. The real enemy was never Rome. It was their own desires making war against them. Rome wasn't the disease. Rome was their treatment, right? Rome was medicine that God had sent to heal their broken hearts. Their own desires were the disease, and God sent Rome to discipline them, which came with taxes. So Jesus said this. Here's how he responds in that moment. Verse 15. But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius." Now, a denarius is about a day's wage, but that's what you'd earn for working for a day. "And let me look at it." So they brought him one. And he said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" They said to him, "Caesar's." And he said to them, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And they marveled at him. All right, so they have completely missed the point. they're so far off that they don't even know where they're at. And they're testing Jesus, hoping he's going to incriminate himself with a question that actually incriminated them, because it showed where their hearts were at. Jesus asked them for a coin. And now, we do our money a little bit different. So I have, rather unusually, cash. Usually I don't. So most of my money says like PNC on it. But this one is a 20, and it has a fella on the face of it. Who knows who that guy is? Huh? It's Andrew Jackson. Yeah, he's on the 20. And so we put inspirational people from the past in our nation on our money. That's what we do. It's not like the dollar tomorrow isn't going to suddenly be replaced with the face of Trump on it, right? That's not how it works today. We have a different system here. So we put ex-presidents or people that weren't presidents but are inspirational. We put those people on our money. We don't put the person who is the head of the government on our money. That's how they did it. That whenever a new Caesar would come into power, the money would be minted with his face on it. Because the point of it was that the money was issued by him. It was used under his authority. It had his likeness on it because it belonged to him, which means that if he wanted it back from you, he could demand it back from you, right? Because it was his. His face was on it. Does that make sense? Yeah? And this is kind of the way that they did money in Rome. The emperor would have his face on the money, and if he demanded taxes, it all belonged to him anyway because his face was on it, so it belonged to him. So when Jesus says that, whose likeness is on it? Caesar's. We'll give it to him. It's his, right? Was he right about that or wrong about that? What do you want to say? He's right. It belonged to his face is on it. Now that doesn't mean you can like tape a face of yourself on something and be like, this car's mine now. Like that's not something you get to do. But in this moment, the money belonged to Caesar. It belonged to him. Therefore, it is his. And if he wants it back, if he demands something from you, you need to give it to him. Which leads me to this. So if you follow that logic that Jesus is setting up, that'll lead us to Genesis chapter 1. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis 1, verse 26. And then God said, "Let us make man in our image." Did you catch that? In our image, after our likeness. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So, following the logic that Christ laid out there, when he said, whose likeness is on this? If Caesar's likeness is on it, therefore it belongs to him. Give him what's his. So if we give Caesar the things that bear his likeness, we should also assume that we need to give to God the things that bear his likeness. Correct? What bears his likeness? You do. Render to God what's his. We get stuck on the pay your taxes part because we don't like that part. We get stuck on it. And we miss the point that he's saying you are to give yourself over to the Lord. Render to Caesar what's his, render to God what belongs to him. I've actually never heard it preached in my life. I've heard this passage preached a ton of times. I've never heard it taught. I've always heard it talked in, pay your taxes, obey civic authorities. I've never heard it said, and you bear the likeness of Christ, so therefore you belong to him. Give him what's his. So what's it look like to render ourselves to Christ? Well, all of you belongs to him. Now that, before we get too deep into this, I want to say it doesn't mean that activity is equal to commitment to God. It was funny. I had the conversation today, and they didn't. I won't embarrass them, but they weren't ready for it. They didn't know that this was coming. Some people here are doers, and what the ideal is a person whose heart, soul, mind is completely turned over to Jesus Christ, and then they do out of that. But some folks have made the false equivalency that if I just do and I'm active all the time in serving the Lord, then somehow that equals my commitment, when it isn't necessarily true. The two don't have to go together. Ideally, they work in tandem, where the whole heart of the person is turned over to Christ, and then out of that, they work. In the book of James, he fights against that idea that your works prove your faith. They don't. But they should work in tandem. Here's what it looks like to be rendered to Christ. You will live a life marked by love. You're going to live a life that is marked by love. Now, our society has, and listen, the more that I realize the part that love plays in discipleship, in growing believers, in transitioning the world away from sin and death and into life and godliness, the more that I see the part that love plays in that, I see why our enemy has worked so hard to destroy the idea of love in our society. We have no clue what love looks like. 1 Corinthians 13 lays out an idea of what that does look like and how we can imitate that. So what is love? Well, it's patient. Love's patient. Love is kind. Love doesn't find itself envying others. And then on the flip side of that, if you're the one to be envied, it's not boastful. Love isn't arrogant. It's very humble. Love is not rude. It is constantly seeking ways to be kind. It never insists on having its own way. Love is not irritable and never resentful. Our love does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but it rather will rejoice in what's true. Love bears all things, it believes all things, it hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. So for the life that is rendered to God, we will be a people marked by love, and not the frilly romantic kind of love, but we will find ourselves sacrificing our lives on behalf of one another because I love you. That means every facet of your life will be submitted to Jesus Christ because you belong to him. Give him what's his. That means my mind, my interactions inside of my body and my thoughts, the way I express myself, everything I do will be submitted unto Jesus Christ. It's a life rendered to God. It's his. Give it to him. When you when you fail, and you inevitably will, we submit our hearts back to Christ and we move forward with purpose, seeking to make amends for the spots that we've been wrong. Doing everything we do in love to ensure that the image that the world sees is the image of Christ. A life rendered to Jesus. That we are accurately reflecting the one we seek to imitate, the one whose image we bear. Verse 18. And it's going to seem to take kind of a weird left turn. And it does in some ways. But it's still carrying this idea. So verse 18 down through 23, and the Sadducees came to him who say there is no resurrection. So there's a group, these are the elite of the elite religious leaders who claim there is no resurrection from the dead, there's no afterlife, it's just once you're dead, you're dead. And they asked him a question saying, "Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and he leaves a wife, but leaves no children, the man must take the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Well, there were 7 brothers. The first took a wife, and when he died, he left no offspring. The second took her, and he died, leaving no offspring. And the third likewise. And the seven left no offspring. So she was married to all 7 of these guys. Last of all, the woman also died. In the resurrection, when they rise again, whose wife will she be? For the 7 had her as a wife. Okay. That's a weird question. But they're trying to trap him once again. So here are the religious leaders. These are the highest of the high. They're the height of the religious elite here in Israel, who claim there's no resurrection from the dead, didn't believe there's an afterlife, which means if this is all you have, you're going to get what you can while you're here. Does that make sense? Like, if this is all there is, I'm going to get it while I'm here. And it's going to open you up to a whole lot of wickedness. And then there's the Pharisees and the Herodians, who were people who were actually kind of more lay leaders of the religious people at the time, and they had probably a little bit more power than they ought to have had. But they did believe there was an afterlife. And so they, however, thought that their position in society was obviously a blessing from God. So since God's blessed them with this position in society, obviously they're doing things right. Even though through their laws and rules they were destroying people and putting burdens on the people they themselves wouldn't carry. But all 3 of these groups, in reality, if you actually in their heart of hearts, they loved Rome. And the reason they loved Rome was because Rome was the force in the background that kept them in power. Because the burdens that they were putting on the people would have overthrown them long ago if it wasn't for the threat of Rome to keep the peace. Does that make sense? So they bring this question that's absurd, and it's absurd on several levels. But the main one is the people who brought it started with a premise they don't believe in. Do you catch that? Like, hey, what's going to happen in the afterlife that I don't think is real? Right? Like it was the premise of the question was completely ridiculous. But the question actually comes from the law, which was put in place for the express purpose of defending women. And it proved that even people in their society that they considered to be property, that they shouldn't have, that they actually should have seen them as image bearers of the Lord and treated them with the respect and care that they deserved. And it's actually I'd say the most pointed example of this was in the life of a young lady by the name of Tamar. If you've never heard of Tamar before, and your kid's sitting beside you, maybe think about covering their ears. So Genesis 38, let's see what Tamar was about. Genesis 38, we're going to pick this up in verse 6. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Okay, so that's pointed. And so here's the situation. This young lady is married. Her husband is wicked. God puts him to death, which leaves her in a position where she has no rights. She has no rights to property. She has really no rights to earn for herself. So she needs to be, it's the same situation Naomi and Ruth found themselves in. They needed to find a kinsman redeemer, someone that would take them on, because they had no hope of a survival without a male support. So there weren't welfare systems or any government systems that were there. So the law stated that the next in line would marry Tamar, marry her. It'd be more of a convenience thing. But they would father children by her. The children would then be in the line of her first husband, because even in the wickedness of God made room for his line to be carried on, so it wasn't blotted out of Israel. That he had made that provision, that grace. And so this young lady would be cared for. She would have children who could then work and support her. And that would be the system that they would put in place. And yet, what you see here is God providing for the weakest of their society out of the abundance of his grace and his care for those created in his image. It was not on God's part. It was an act motivated by love, but these marriages weren't loving marriages. They should have been. They should have treated these women as image bearers of the Lord. But marriages almost entirely at this time had ceased to be about love. You saw it like Abraham and Sarah, and you saw Isaac and Rebekah. Like, it started loving, but then it had become very transactional. I need someone to raise children and make food. And this is what the transactions had become. So then it goes on in verse 8. And Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife, perform the duty of the brother-in-law to her, raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. And this is the part where you cover your kids' ears. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground so as not to give offspring to his brother. Okay, yeah. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. So, who's ready to get awkward? All right, so here's what was going on. Onan would have sex with Tamar right up to the moment where he would provide her with children, and then he would stop and waste it on the ground. So he's using her for his own desires, but not giving her what she needs. He's not actually treating her with love. He's just using her. And listen, if I can just be straight about this, when we use one another to satisfy our own desires, that is abuse. That's what that is. And this man was abusing poor Tamar. He was not acting in love. He was not treating her as one who would be an image bearer of the Lord. He was not rendering to God what belonged to him. And for that offense, he was put to death. Now, if you read the whole story, we will not, but if you read the whole story, Tamar finds out that her father-in-law is going to be traveling by soon, so she positions herself on the road. If you want to talk about a trap, here's one. She positions herself on the road dressed as a prostitute, which entices him, and he goes, and she has children by her father-in-law that way, and if I can just point out to you this, where we see the love of God lavished upon us. Tamar has a child through that interaction with her father-in-law, who later on will become one of the ancestors to Jesus Christ. That God chose to bring Christ through that mess. And how he, in his love for you, will take horrible, sinful, disgusting circumstances and turn it around for something beautiful. And that's what it looks like when we live a life rendered unto Christ. We will take horrible, disgusting, terrible circumstances and watch them be turned into something beautiful. All right, verse 24, let's finish it out. Of Mark. All right. And Jesus said to them, "Is this not the reason you are wrong? Because you neither know the scriptures nor the power of God." Okay, that hurts their feelings, I'm sure. Like they were not excited when he said, "Well, you don't know anything about the scriptures," and they're like the highest of the high. Can you imagine? Like, okay. I don't know if you have as imaginative as a mind as I do. But when he said that, I heard the whole crowd go, oh, like that's what I heard. So, like, anyway, that was the moment, because, like, Jesus just, like, if you had a mic drop moment, that was it, right? Jesus said to them, is this not the reason you're wrong? Because you neither know the scriptures nor the power of God. For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. As for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the passage about the bush, how God spoke to him, and he said, I am, catch the present tense of that, I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. And he's not the God of the dead, but of the living. You're quite wrong. So, why does this matter? Because we serve a living God. And he is a God of the living. So when he mentioned Abraham, Isaac, and was it Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? He laid those men out. Understand that he just said, it's not that these men worshipped me when they were alive. Those men are worshiping me right now. Did you catch that? I'm not the God of the dead, I'm the God of the living. They're alive. And so the Sadducees were asking a question. Is this life all that there is? And that was their question. They didn't care about this young lady and who was going to be married to her in heaven. They were asking the question of, is there an afterlife? And he said, yeah. Didn't you see it in Genesis when God said to Abraham, he talked in the present tense, or he talked to Moses, talked in the present tense. These men are alive today, worshiping me today. And so, how we live our lives, this is why it matters that we live a life rendered unto Christ, because how we live it today echoes on into the next life. That what we do today, how we live in this world, will move on into life with us if we live lives of love towards one another. If you believe that when you die nothing happens, then how you treat people doesn't matter anymore. Because this is all there is. But if it moves on into eternity, we talked a few weeks ago about how the man with a demon-possessed son, he made that famous phrase, do you remember it? I believe, help my unbelief. Do you remember that? How much of his unbelief was caused by the way the disciples behaved? Is there anyone that you know who carries unbelief because of how you've acted? That's not a life rendered to Christ. We live lives turned over wholly to Jesus with the purpose of drawing many souls into salvation. And these people didn't understand the scriptures. They didn't understand that it's not about perfection and power structures. It's about love and humility. It's about obedience, submission, to offer our lives as a sacrifice to the Lord. The Apostle Paul calls himself a slave to Christ. The word he uses there is called doulos. It actually means slave. Bond slave, in fact. It means that he willingly is enslaving himself to his master. Render yourself to Christ in full submission. Turn over the whole of your being to the one whose image you bear. And in every circumstance, seek to live as Christ would in the world around you. Reminding yourself that since you bear his image, you belong to him. Lord Jesus, we are grateful for your image in our lives and on our hearts. I do pray that we would find ourselves actively seeking to submit to you in all that we do, rendering ourselves to you, living in love towards the world around us. Would you walk with us and remind us of who we belong to so we may give ourselves over to you. In your name we pray. Amen. Would you stand with us as we close?
There's future grace that's mine today, that Jesus Christ has won. So I can face tomorrow, for tomorrow's in your hands. All I need you will provide, just like you always have. I'm fighting a battle you've already won. No matter what comes my way, I will overcome. Don't know what you're doing, but I know what you've done. I'm fighting a battle you've already won. When the sea is raging, your spirit is.
All right. There is a second song. It's called the Doxology. It's one we sing it week in, week out, and there's purpose behind that. The reason is that that we are a blessed people. And listen, sometimes I give you things to think about, and sometimes I don't. Today I'm going to give you one. Will you stop and consider the blessing that it is to bear the image of Christ? I just stop. Let's take I don't know, Susan, count to 15 and then start playing. Just take a minute, 15 seconds of a minute, and think about the blessing it is that you bear the image of Christ. We'll do that. Our Father, we thank you for the gift of your Son. And Jesus, we thank you that we get to bear your image. And Lord, would you help us get a hold of this idea that when we have the image of God combined with the Spirit of God, powerful things happen. I pray we'd walk in that power, choosing to love everywhere we go. We love you, Jesus. We thank you. In your name, amen. Have a seat for me real quick. If you're going on a mission trip today, we need you here around 1 o'clock, so right after Sunday school, so please stick around if you're going on a mission trip. Also, just FYI, we have some of these fire blankets. That it's part of one of our fundraisers for our mission trip. So it's a fiberglass blanket that you can put in your house, and if you have a fire on the stove or something, you throw this over it and it puts it out. So it's a great tool, something you want around your house. Buy several for gifts, 20 for one, 15 if you want more than one. So that's one of our one of our mission trip fundraisers that we're doing right now. So please consider picking one of these up. We have a pile of them in the office. Get them, I'd say while they're hot, but that seems in bad taste. All right, so... All right, we are still looking for greeters. Denny and Scott seem to have that door just on lockdown. They do a great job there. But out this side, we could use a couple people every week to stop by. You wouldn't have to be you every week, but every now and then. So see Zach, raise your hand. There he is, and he will get you some details. If that's just an easy way to start serving the church or get to know people. All right, speaking of Zach, there he is again, raises his other hand. His class, starting the second week or third week of his study that he's doing, Don't Give the Enemy a Seat at Your Table. It will be up here today for the adult class. So downstairs was a little noisy. They liked the intimate setting, but it was a little noisy. So they'll be meeting up here this morning moving forward. All right, so please, that's during the Sunday school hour. Please make it to that. All right, our congregation meeting's coming up. It's the last Sunday in January. So I think that's next week, right? Does that hit right? Yeah. So it's the last week, or it's next Sunday, is our congregation meeting. There will be no Sunday school that day. Also, please sign up to bring something for the potluck so that we have plenty of food to enjoy after the meeting. We also have a couple announcements. So I know I try not to do more than 3 announcements because I lose you after a couple. But please, I need you to tune in for this one. We are a part of a organization called the Keystone Family Alliance. Now, it started out in Center County, and it's been bleeding on into other counties. And through I meet with a group of pastors every Wednesday morning, and through that group, we really got to bring the Keystone Family Alliance into our county. And they focus on helping with foster and adoptive parents and kids. If you have ever rubbed shoulders with someone in a foster or adopted scenario, those people need support more than typical family does. They are showing a movie. I believe it's up at Zion Church, just 8 miles or so up the road, and it's called Unseen, and it kind of follows a lot of this stuff. Also, we have a fundraiser event for them coming up, and we need to fill 2 tables. I think 8 persons each, so 16 seats. I'm looking for. The Snyders are back in the back, aren't they? So they're with kids now. But see Nate or Nikki Snyder. They will get you all the details on that dinner as well. So that fundraiser is coming up, and you won't want to miss that. So if you want to come and be a part of that, hear about the ministry, what they're doing, we would love to have you be there with us. All right. Now, moving on. Snow Camp is here again. It's on the 14th through the 16th of February. Leatherwood takes a group of students up, and any of our students are welcome to attend as well. So if you want to go to Snow Camp, please come see me, and I'll get you all the details you need or your teen wants to go. And then on February 2nd, we are having a church breakfast here. All right? Yeah. He was middle and high school, I believe. Yeah. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, 12, 18, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, okay. 12, 18. Yep. All right. The rest of the stuff is just dates. Oh, yes. Around 9:35 to 9:45, somewhere in that ballpark, we lock the building down once we're inside. Okay? Does that make sense? Because what we've noticed, if you watch the news and see church shootings when they happened, it happened kind of in little churches in the middle of nowhere, which, hey, here we are. So we wanted to avoid that so as best we could. So we lock the place down after the service begins, and that's usually about 9:35, 9:45, somewhere in that ballpark. So we do have, if you come to the sanctuary doors behind you, there's a call button you can push, and it will let the guys upstairs know, and they can buzz you into the building. All right? Or just like rattle the door hard, and we'll hear it, and someone will come and let you in. But, or if you're a member of Grace, come see me. I'll get you a code and get you in the building. Like, you just punch it in, and it opens the door, and then, hey, don't have to rattle nothing. So, like, come see us. We'll get you a key to the building, let you in, and you can let yourself in. But we do lock the building down for safety. We just need you to, So if you're a few minutes late, go to those doors. The rest will be locked down. All right? All right. Go downstairs, get some coffee, get a snack. What am I pointing at now? Yes. The toy drive for Romania has been extended to February 2nd. So there's still room for toys. Bring them in.